Welcome back. Former Free State Premier Ace Magashule has been released on 200,000 rand bail after he appeared briefly in the Bloemfontein Magistrate Court on 21 charges of corruption and fraud, alternatively theft and money laundering. The matter was postponed to the 19th of February 2021 for addition of at least 3 more accused persons on the charge sheet and to join Magashule with the rest of the accused. Dian Oosthuizen is a criminal expert from Ulrich, Roux and Associates. He joins us now to talk about this. First of all, let me start with what I found a very curious statement. The judge was saying earlier on, he made a point of emphasizing that he will not rubber stamp what the police and the prosecution will do or say, but that all decisions that he takes will be based on evidence before him, saying that pretty much implying that there won't be any prejudice. Why was this important, do you think?
Good evening, Tapiso. Thank you for having me this evening. It's very important, and that's also very interesting that he mentioned that. The reason I think that he stated that is to show that because Mr. Magashule is an executive member of the governing body, that the courts would use their objectivity. It's not in the fact that because Mr. Magashule is well known and he can put a lot of pressure on people with his influence, if you can state it that way. It's very important for the court, I think, to make a point from the start that they would be objective in this sense.
And I want you to take us through the charges so that we clearly understand them and what in relation it has to do with fraud and corruption. Just explain to us what exactly is he accused of, because there is the suggestion that he violated his legal duties as a premier and that he breached the trust of office, and not only that he abused his authority.
So if you look at the charges that laid against Mr. Magashule, there is a few main charges. The main charges is that of corruption and fraud. Alternatively, there's charges of money laundering and theft. One must also bear in mind that the charge sheet has not been completed as yet, so further charges may be added. So when you look at the main charges in this matter, corruption and fraud, as mentioned, it is also clear because of the amount involved that the Minimum Sentence Act is applicable. So meaning that should the magistrate or the judge rather found Mr. Magashule as guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, that Mr. Magashule might be imprisonment for 15 years, as that is the minimum sentence.
Now, I want to understand the alternative of. Why is that important? Because as you speak about those amounts, the suggestions of gratification to the tune of 470,000 rand, allegedly accepted 2 other payments of 200,000, 100,000 rand respectively, another for 250,000 rand. So what is alternative to this? Is this a legal term?
So when the prosecution starts a matter, they've got main charges and then they've got alternative charges. Like in this instance, the main charges, like we said, is corruption and fraud. The alternative charge for fraud is theft. So the prosecution can decide on whether or not they want to lay the alternative charges. That is the alternative charges is just there should the prosecution fail to prove that Mr. Magashule in this instance is guilty of corruption or fraud. The magistrate, the judge rather, could find that Mr. Magashule is guilty of theft.
I want to talk about what the MPA is saying, that they are confident of the case that they have. In fact, they wish or hope that the case is moved to the High Court when it resumes next year. What would be the significance of this?
So, like we said, that today Mr. Magashule was granted bail in the amount of 200,000 rand, and the matter has now subsequently been postponed to the 19th of February 2021. The prosecution made it also clear that some of the investigations have been finalized. So that means that on the next occasion, on the 19th of February, there's a possibility that the matter be transferred to the High Court. Should the investigations indeed be completed, we can see a trial date anytime soon next year, depending on the strategy that the defense team will apply.
There's strategy, and there is, as we talk about the veracity of these allegations, obviously they'll be tested in court. He and his supporters have repeatedly said that he is innocent until proven guilty. But I want to talk about one of the most important issues that have come out, that he had knowledge of the irregular and illegal nature of an agreement signed between Blackhead and Mbambane and the Department of Human Settlements. How would you go about proving this? Would this be attaching your signature, or just by being the political head, administrative head at the time?
At this moment in time, we also need to bear in mind that there's a lot of speculation running in this matter, seeing that it is such a high-profile matter. One must look, when a matter is in front of court, there's different types of evidence that the prosecution and that the judge will take into account. You get direct evidence, and then you get circumstantial evidence. So direct evidence is when a person witnesses the crime with their own eyes, where circumstantial evidence is a link rather, between the parties.
All right, Dian Oosthuizen, thank you so much. He's a criminal expert from Ulrich, Roux and Associates. We continue now with this. Joining me is Ibrahim Fakir, Director of Programs at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. You've been listening to the tail end of that, and I think a lot of what we heard, the rhetoric, what we heard today from Mr. Magashule and his supporters is about that, circumstantial evidence and actual evidence of a wrongdoing. How much is this lighting the powder keg of tensions that already exist in the ANC? And are we able to differentiate between a truth, or at least a prima facie case that's been presented, and the tensions, the divisions where people are hurling allegations at each other?
So this is not about lighting them. This is about deepening them, or kind of actually making a fire into an inferno, because, look, the fire has been there already. This is about making an inferno. And what we saw today was actually, I don't know, I'm actually lost for words. The one word which comes to mind is silly. The other is kind of paranoid delusion. The other is hysteria. And the other is just simply relativity, because you hear what these people are saying and you wonder to yourself, do they inhabit the same political party? Are they leaders of the same political party? Because the one part of the party, the leadership, the currently elected leadership, says people mustn't go in ANC regalia, and the organization mustn't be brought into disrepute, and the organization must not go. Let the court proceedings go ahead as they are. Others say no. There's just individuals there. We're not an organization. And yet, one of the NEC members says, no, we're here in our organizational colors representing the institution. So this is open, clear, fundamental defiance of the instructions, not just of their colleagues, but of their highest decision-making body.
And I want to zone in on that, Ibrahim. Pule Mabe, for instance, was saying that first of all, they are not there as individuals, but when asked about the resolution taken at Congress about people who have charges preferred on them and having to step aside, he said the ANC must speak, they are not the ANC. Ace Magashule himself saying that, he's not going to step aside unless the branches ask him to do so. Tony Yengeni saying there's no committee that's going to ask him to step aside, speaking about the NEC, which he says has been charged to deal with this issue.
No, but that's the ANC since 2005. Well, actually, it's the ANC a little bit before that. We've got one message depending on who you are and who we're speaking to, and if it's a different audience and a different kind of platform we're on, we have a different message. But most fundamentally, we have different messages when our own individual interests are at stake. So basically, what you've got here is a bunch of people who are engaged not just in societal anarchy, but in organizational anarchy, because they're saying, we've made this rule. This rule is a rule we made at the NEC collectively. Now, suddenly, two things are thrown out the window. First is the idea of collective responsibility. So now they can be, they're there as individuals, they're not there as a collective. When their interests are threatened, they are there as a collective. Now, depending on when the interests are threatened, they switch from taking collective responsibility to taking individual responsibility. That's a recipe not just for defiance, but for organizational anarchy.
But can the public trust that the ANC itself is being consistent? Because...
No, absolutely not. And that's precisely what I'm saying. They are hopelessly inconsistent. We don't even have to pose the question about whether the society should or ought to trust that they can be consistent. The evidence is fairly clear. From way back 2005, they've been completely inconsistent. Look, the only difference now is that the context has changed and changed fundamentally. You can see that there is a rehearsal of what President Zuma did when President Mbeki asked him to step aside and charges were going to be preferred against him. And he also wanted his day in court, remember. But that day obviously never comes because that dawn never seems to arrive. But what's happening in this case, look, at that time, President Zuma had the support of an organized ANC Youth League, the Communist Party, the labor movement, society generally, commentators. There was a major groundswell, and there was a great degree of unhappiness with the leadership of Thabo Mbeki, even inside the ANC. Now, the factions are not as clear-cut. They are not as ideological. They are purely mercurial and pecuniary.
It's interesting that you say they're not as ideological. There was a lot to be said about not only why Ace Magashule is being targeted. The names of Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, Muammar Gaddafi, Chris Hani were resurrected to show how he's a radical revolutionary who has the sights and the interests of the people before him. And this is why even Jacob Zuma himself was brought up.
No, this is the paranoid delusion. And of course, in 2005, the pretense that there was an ideological sort of outlook and a policy difference in approach, that Zuma was going to be more consultative, macroeconomic was not going to be as neoliberal or as supply-side based, that there was going to be fundamental consultation and inclusivity in the approach. We know all of that was wrong, but that was what was proffered. Now, you don't even have that pretense. What you have is this dredging up of names entirely acontextually, inappropriately. In fact, some of those people didn't die or weren't killed. Lumumba was obviously killed and murdered. Nkrumah died of natural causes. A whole bunch of others did too. But this is the kind of craziness of dredging up things which are completely acontextual. They don't matter. There isn't a radical bone in the body of the RET faction, if they want to call it that.
What should we expect going forward?
SABC will become fractionalized. Sorry?
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm asking you, what should we expect going forward? Ungai Kalimpi was something that was said quite a number of times. Ace Magashule was saying Dimpimpi spies are the problem in the ANC. And the use of the term kept on coming up repeatedly. The ANC Secretary-General did not buy the elections. We don't have billions of rands to buy favor. The fact that the country has been handed over to the Oppenheimers and the Ruperts on a silver plate. But there was a clear threat that files, so to speak, are going to be, brought up.
Yeah, but I mean, this is the kind of weird threat. This is kind of Jack in the Beanstalk stuff. So this beanstalk grows and just grows legs of lies and branches of lies. And so there's also another weird inconsistency. It's like saying you catch one rapist and the rapist says, listen, I can't go on trial until you catch all the other rapists. So that's the kind of inconsistent and weird and odd logic that is apparent here, firstly. Secondly, this is the kind of hysteria which we should expect going forward. Third, as was the case in 2005, 2006, going until 2007 in Polokwane, the threat of we'll unleash anarchy We will do that, but that's precisely the rehearsal of the playbook. The only thing is that the context now is vastly different. It rehearses what President Zuma's approach was at that time. I'm not entirely sure it will work, but make no mistake, these people do have some kind of support, but society has to be now clearer about what is fact, what is fiction, what is in society's interests, what is in their own interest. And clearly, in my view, I think it's fairly transparent that this is entirely in their own view. It's got nothing to do with society and redistribution, because ultimately, what is he accused of? He's accused of taking things from people whose lives should have been made better, but weren't.
All right, thank you so much for your time and insights. Ibrahim Fakir, Director of Programs at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute. And of course, we'll continue pursuing this with legal journalist Karen Warren. She unpacks Ace Magashule's journey from a premier to corruption accused, and whether or not forensic probes that are underway will look at other ANC officials and what the implications of that could be.